Wyatt Roy, welcome to Straight Talk, mate. How you
Hey,
going?
mate, great to be here. Great to have a chat.
Well, here you're not here actually. You're all the way over in is it Riyadh?
I am in Riyadh, which in the middle of summer is the best place in the world, actually. It's glorious and sunny and blue skies and one of the most interesting places on the planet, I think.
And just to explain to everybody, Riyadh being in Saudi Arabia, just give us a bit of a broader aspect of where you are, like physically, like in the world, like relative to some places, because a lot of people don't even know where Saudi Arabia is. I mean, obviously the Middle East, but where generally?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most highly kind of strategic and connected places in the world. If you think about it in terms of the map, you can get to an enormous percentage of the world's population within a few hours. So, highly strategic in the Middle East, but a few hours flight to Europe, a few hours flight to Asia, a little bit longer to America and Australia. But it is this really beautiful part of the world. Very strategic in terms of how you can move goods and services around the world, and obviously it's a rapidly growing and developing part of the world as well. So it's a real kind of hub that is opening up to people from across the globe. And now there are thousands and thousands of people moving here and starting to call it home.
And we'll talk a little bit later about sort of who Wyatt Roy was many years ago. It seems like a long time ago. It wasn't that long ago, but a few
Not
years
that
ago. In
old
terms,
yet, Mark. Not
yeah,
not that old yet.
well, you're still like mid-30s, I'd say, about
Yeah,
35 or something like that.
yeah.
And but what are you doing in Riyadh or in Saudi Arabia? What are you doing in Riyadh now in Saudi Arabia? What are you doing right now? Like, what's your role?
Yeah. So up until this week, and a bit of a exclusive for you and the listeners, I've
Oh,
been
wow.
the head of innovation at NEOM, which is one of the most exciting projects on the planet. It's an incredibly beautiful part of the world in northwest Saudi Arabia. It's actually the size of Belgium, that's been developed as part of the economic transition of the kingdom. And so up until this week, I was head of innovation for the last 2 years, an incredible kind of chapter where I worked with people across the country, across innovation, whether that's entrepreneurs, investors, funds, agencies, research and development institutions, to help drive that economic transition and really how we can look at solving the big challenges in the world across, name the different verticals, whether that's healthcare or education or mobility or energy, to help ultimately drive that economic transition, but to help make a better world. And so I've had 2 years of doing that, which has been absolutely incredible, but maybe a little bit of an exclusive for you. Now moving on to the next chapter, which I won't be able to say just yet what it is, but working with really interesting people in the region as well, doing the next thing, which I'm very excited about, but incredibly grateful, which for what has been a life changing experience to work with some of these people in this remarkable country.
So when you say NEOM, maybe you speak like as if it's very familiar with it, which obviously it is. Like most of us, I sort of know what it's about, but most Australians wouldn't know what NEOM means. The word even is an unusual word. What is NEOM doing? You talked about innovation. You talked about perhaps sponsoring entrepreneurs, making sure people have made discoveries, trying to basically help the world. And you talked about economic transition for Saudi Arabia. What are we sort of transitioning from to? What are the objectives? And in particular, what's NEOM's focus?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's a big project, so it does take a while for everyone to kind of get across it, and just to have something that ambitious in the modern world, I think is hugely exciting. But it's different, right? It's naturally different by what it is. So let me talk through where it is and what it looks like, and then I can talk through how it plays a role in the bigger kind of transition. So, as I said, it's in the northwest of Saudi Arabia, genuinely one of the most beautiful parts of the world that I've ever seen. So, very close and connected to the rest of the world, but it's situated along the Gulf of Aqaba and then into the Red Sea, which, as a Queenslander, it's really hard to say this, but some of the most amazing reef I've ever seen anywhere in the world.
Like as in a
Beautiful,
coral reef. Coral,
coral
like,
reef, yeah. The
wow.
Red Sea coral is actually some of the most special coral anywhere in the world because it's extremely resistant to heat. So the Red Sea is the warmest sea in the world, and these corals are incredibly vibrant and beautiful. Um, Huge sea life. So we have turtles and dolphins and whale sharks and every marine mammal you can kind of think of existing in this pretty untouched part of the world. Very kind of virgin. NEOM has a series of islands that go into the Red Sea, which are absolutely stunning. And then as you hit the shoreline, you go into this amazing mountain range, which goes right up to where we're building a resort in the mountains where you'll be able to ski in the winter. So it actually snows up there. And To give you a sense of that, that's higher than Mount Kosciuszko. So within a few
Wow.
hours, you can go from this remarkable sea up into these beautiful mountains where we're building this kind of resort. And then you go out into the desert, which is the Hizma Desert, which ultimately, if you follow it through to the north, hits Wadi Rum in Jordan. So if anyone's seen those amazing kind of rock formations, very much like Dune, the movie, this landscape that is stunning is the best way to say it. So very much open to a lot of movies being filmed there now. So it gives you a little bit of a flavor. But this beautiful kind of desert environment, which we're actually rewilding with native Arabian plants and native Arabian animals, which is one of the most remarkable, environmental projects on the planet, I would say. And then it's just very large beyond that as well. And so, in this beautiful part of the world, as I said, the size of Belgium, it's over 20,000 square kilometers. We are doing two big things. We're building big things. And I have to be careful. I'm saying we. I'm no longer as of this week there, but we are building very, very large projects. So, as I said, the ski resort in the mountain, a highly strategic port operated pretty much with renewable energy, and sitting alongside that, the world's largest green hydrogen facility, which is almost completed, completely powered by renewable energy, exporting green hydrogen to the world. People would have seen the line, the very significant vertical city to be built over a long period, and then ultimately developing the whole kind of region to be a new hub for what is a really big growing population. So that's exciting in the sense that we're building a lot of interesting things, and that's true across the entire country. But I think what's the real story is that it's part of the economic transition of the kingdom. So to kind of situate it, if you think about the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Australia, similar-ish sized economies, similar-ish population, so about 36 million people in Saudi, 26 million in Australia, and resource-based economies in transition. So obviously the kingdom has had this remarkable economic growth driven predominantly by oil. And under the leadership of the Crown Prince, there's a single national mission for the whole country called Vision 2030, which is all how do we diversify the economy? So obviously oil was a great story for the country. It's created a lot of prosperity, but we want to diversify the economy so that we can hand over, greater prosperity to the next generation. They're opening up their society. So Saudi was obviously a very closed society, and there's very strong goals around creating a vibrant society for all Saudis. And then it's just a very ambitious push to do that, even though they have this long-term plan in a very short time. So the country has gone through this remarkable transformation in about the last 10 years. And to give you a sense of that, it's one of the fastest growing economies in the G20. It's seeing this huge kind of push into non-oil industries. So in the last 12 months, about 56% of economic activity was non-oil. If you went back a decade, you're almost in single digits. So this huge kind of shift. In the last year, about 90% of foreign direct investment into the kingdom was into non-oil industries. And so we're seeing that big transition. And then layered on top of that is just a remarkable, very young population. So the average age of a Saudi is 26. 70% of the country is under 35.
Wow.
And so that's opening up to the world. And as they do that, through that diversification of the economy, the country is making big bets in different industries, whether that's in AI or technology or whatever it might be. And I think what's true for Saudi, and it's also true for the region, is the sort of starting point is how do you often use technology to address the big challenges facing the globe, whether that's, conservation or the environment or creating a business friendly environment or whatever pillar of the economy you're sort of focusing on, there's a real leaning into how we use technology disruption in a positive way to help drive that economic transition. And so as that country goes through that change, it's very similar to what we tried to do in Australia around our national innovation and science agenda of how do we create these new pillars of economic growth in those industries. And the kingdom's been remarkably successful in these Vision 2030. There's actually stated goals and objectives as you go, and they're basically meeting and beating all of these goals, which no one thought was possible a few short years ago. So
As in
um,
KPIs.
KPIs, yeah, which is amazing for a nation to have KPIs on these different things over the long term. So we're ahead of schedule on many of them. We're beating a lot of those targets on many of them. And obviously, there's a long way to go, and there's big kind of challenges in doing this. But I think with long term vision, met by kind of a national mission, it creates the right ingredients to do something that, frankly, I just don't think we've seen in human history, or certainly not for a very, very long time.
And is Saudi Arabia funding all this themselves, or are they attracting lots of investment from around the world?
So it's a mixture of both. I mean, it's natural when you do this in the first instance that you'd want to put in a lot of your own kind of capital to start that charge and create, the right investment environment and create a magnet for that investment environment. But what we're seeing now is really an explosion of private capital seeking to come into the kingdom, which is an interesting transition because if you think about the kingdom, maybe 10 years ago, a lot of the world sort of thought of it as almost as an ATM. Investors were coming to take money out of the kingdom. Now investments are coming in their droves to invest into this. And it's just a large economy, right? 36 million people. It's about the Australian size, a little bit smaller, but about the size of the Australian economy. And so we're seeing this huge injection of private capital, whether that's through PPP arrangements or just direct investment. And then layered on top of that, you're just seeing a really high growth non-oil private economy. So, particularly in the area that I'm most familiar with, in the technology sector, big explosion in private venture capital flowing into that sector, and there's thousands of startups in the country now raising many hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases that are homegrown, and you're now seeing that real engine of economic activity pick up, and the rest of the world is looking at Saudi and saying, how do we invest and how do we be there?
It's an interesting thing when you talk about the whole region. We hear about Israel and Tel Aviv, like the amazing technology hubs that they have there, and the big investments that they have in Israel. We hear all the stories about the UAE countries, all the stuff that they're doing, particularly around health technology in relation to Dubai and Abu Dhabi. We don't hear too much in this part of the world about Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia actually dwarfs all of those places,
Yeah,
both
I think so.
physically and economically, probably.
Correct, but I think absolutely, I think that's true. But the region rises together. This is the kind of change. So, President Trump was here, a few months ago, and it was this incredible trip. I was fortunate to sort of be in the room with him, and you had sort of the CEOs of the biggest. If you could think of a big company on the planet, basically they're in the room with the president and the crown prince. And when he was talking about his vision for the region, he had one thing that I think really resonated with the room, which is the new model of the Middle East. And I think the Middle East has such a difficult history. People just come to it with those kind of biases. But the new Middle East is one that's defined by commerce, not chaos. And that's actually what we're seeing. We're seeing this huge influx of talented people, of capital, and obviously just a booming local population redefine the Middle East. And as they all kind of rise, they all benefit. But you're right, Saudi is by far the biggest kind of economy out of the region because it's just a bigger population, a bigger country, and going through a bigger transformation. But those benefits are being shared very much across the region. And I think if you take a 20, 30, 40-year view, which is the beauty of this place, you can do that. I think this really becomes one of the hubs of the globe. The Crown Prince has this saying, which I completely agree with him on, where he says Saudi Arabia is the most exciting story of the 21st century. And just the revolution that we've seen in the last 10 years, I think he is completely right. And to your point, it's an often untold story, but it's one that more and more I think the world is waking up to. And I think that's a great thing for this country, but I think it's a great thing for the world as well.
If it's interesting that you just said you're in the room with Trump. every CEO of every major company in the world, the Crown Prince and all his entourage as well. You're in your mid-30s. Wyatt Roy is always, for some reason, I've known you for a long time. For some reason, you've always seemed to be able to be in the company of people who influence outcomes, new outcomes, change, especially change. And I go back to Wyatt Roy. Well, let's go back really a long way. We're talking about Wyatt Roy. He's a young kid from Queensland. Tell me a little bit about your story. Like, how'd you grow up? What was your dad doing, your mum, etc.?
So
Whereabouts?
Riyadh is a long way from the strawberry farm that I grew up in
Totally.
Queensland, but I am so proud of where I came from, and I'm very lucky to kind of have that grounding in life. So I grew up on a strawberry farm in Queensland. I'm the first person in my family to finish high school. Two older
Wow.
brothers who went on to other things, which I love, but everyone in my family went to either grade 9 or grade 10, and my dad, who sadly passed away this year, he had this saying where he was so good at grade 9 they asked him to do it twice, and then he left and obviously went into the farm. So my family were initially citrus farmers and then strawberry farmers. At our peak, we had about 1 million strawberry plants. So it was a great way to kind of grow up. I grew up on the sunny coast, so you're sort of close enough to Brisbane, but then you've got the grounding of the farm. We had a lot of backpackers from all over the world working on the farm, so you got early exposure to interesting people. And I always say farming, whether it's politics or business, um, there's a lot of lessons that you learn from farming that I think can be applied because it's super high risk. There's a lot of things that are out of your control. You don't know if it's going to rain or not. You don't know what can kind of happen. And so farmers have this. I think they're the most amazing kind of entrepreneurs. No sane person would go into farming, right? It's tough, it's
Mm.
hard, it's all these sorts of things. So that was the kind of environment that I grew up in, and then I got into politics at a very young age. I think I'm one of, if not the youngest, directly elected person in the world. And then I was obviously the youngest minister as well. So I was campaigning for Parliament when I was 19, elected when I was 20, and minister when I was 25. So, an amazing kind of experience. And then, lots of journey in life after that.
Yeah, but you also, as I recall, were part of Malcolm Turnbull's Innovation Nation sort of game. That was something he wanted Australia to be, which unfortunately didn't work out in the end, through for a whole lot of reasons. But what was it like, and what spark of an idea did you get from Malcolm Turnbull during that period as one of his ministers in such what seemed to me at the time a really ambitious program for Australia? By the way, I
Yeah.
wish we had done it.
Yeah, and I think the politics of it is really hard in Australia, and that is what is so different here. I think with a young population and opening up, there's just a natural kind of acceptance of this is what we should do. But in the Australian context, if you think about it, it's very similar to the Saudi story. I mean, we had a resource-based economy for a very long time, hugely successful. We had more than a quarter of a century of uninterrupted economic growth, so that's a good thing, and that was driven by lots of things, but predominantly by we have rocks in the ground and we live close to people that want to buy them, which is a great thing. We're very lucky in that sense. But when I became involved in politics and was in the parliament, I quickly realized that there were a lot of young Australian entrepreneurs at that time. Now we're going back more than 10 years, who as soon as their businesses sort of got successful, they left the country. They went to the US, they went to Singapore, they went wherever, which in some cases is okay because you want them to get access to a global market and capital, but you want them to come back and contribute to the economy, and you want to keep that base there to really create this pillar of the economy. And so I took a real interest in that space. Malcolm obviously has a huge amount of passion and ambition and vision in that space for the country, and I would push back because on the policy front we were actually quite successful, but the politics is very hard. So if you think about it practically, what we did was we said 10 years ago, we've got this huge economic success and engine in resources. If we're going to hand over to the next generation of Australians a country with more prosperity, then we do have to diversify the economy and create a new pillar of the economy, much like here. And so my baby was what we called, as you kind of pointed out, the National Innovation and Science Agenda. So it was a single push across government to create the framework for the private sector to take over. So it was 24 policies across 9 government departments. Think everything from tax changes, visa changes, education, research and development, etc. Really modeling on best practice across the globe, sort of frankly stealing some of the best ideas from these great innovation hubs. Now, why the politics has been difficult, the policy outcome I think is overlooked a little bit, and I would sort of argue the point, Mark. The In 10 years, we've gone from a situation where, before I was minister, we were investing less than 200 million in venture capital. Right? That's less than we bet on the Melbourne Cup, which gives you a sense of like, either Australians bet a lot or we just weren't putting much into this sector. You couldn't really measure it in terms of impact to GDP or jobs. And in 10 years, now today, tech and innovation is the third biggest contributor to the Australian economy. Right? Mining, financial services, then tech and innovation. It's the seventh biggest employer in the country, and it's the fastest growing jobs growth industry. So if you actually look at the employment figures, for the last significant period, overwhelmingly the jobs growth has come from growth within the technology and innovation sector in the country. We've seen over $30 billion of private capital flow into venture capital in that period. So from 200 billion, we've seen over 30 billion fly in. And so, there's a long way to go. There's a lot more reform that I would have liked to have seen happen. But the truth is, from that early push, it's now a powerhouse of the Australian economy. I mean, as a country, we've built over 20 unicorn companies. Some of them with really significant valuations. There's over 100 companies in Australia that have over $100 million valuation in tech and innovation. And so it is creating national prosperity. It is employing millions of Australians. We're actually on track to have 1.2 million Australians working in the sector by 2030. And so I know why we love to sort of talk ourselves down as a country, but if you look at it on a per capita basis, Australia is punching way above its weight. We now have this new pillar of economic strength. And ultimately, what that will mean is the next generation of Australians are just going to enjoy more economic prosperity and have more opportunity. Now, that went out of vogue politically, and I'd love to see that energy come back. I'd love to see a little bit of what we see in Saudi Arabia, actually, where we're saying this is really important. But we should be proud of what we've done as a country because, these incredible entrepreneurs and investors and researchers and scientists have changed the Australian economy in the last 10 years. And I think what we did was we created the framework for them to do that. Now, as a small government person, I'm happy when government gets out of the way and they take over. But I don't think we should lose that emphasis as a nation.
I mean, I'm going to ask you to come back and go for politics again, mate. But like, maybe your new venture,
Pretty
which
happy here, Mark. I got to tell you, I do like this
maybe
part of the world, but you never know. If
maybe
you
your
can
new
tell you what,
venture.
Mark, if you come into politics with me, I'll consider it.
Yeah, well, mate, don't worry. Maybe we both have to,
Yeah.
because what's really interesting when you talk about technology or innovation generally and entrepreneurs, one of the things you touched on earlier was a lot of Australians have left the shores in order to try and be successful. What I noticed, what I notice about people who go to Singapore, people who go to the Middle East, and people who go to the US, they're either chasing one or two things or both. They're either chasing capital,
Correct.
which where you are, it's in abundance. Not just Saudi money, but just money coming into Saudi looking for innovation, to invest in
Yep.
innovation, or they're trying to find a better tax environment
Correct.
for innovation, around
Yep.
innovation. Well, now, whether that's some R&D write-off or whatever the case may be, citizenship, et cetera, et cetera. Singapore does a great job at it. They're either chasing one or two or both. Saudi seems to have nailed both because, as I understand, you've got either zero tax base or very low tax base in Saudi Arabia, and there's plenty of capital. How important do you think that is? Because you said there's a lot of money now finding its way to Saudi Arabia. How important is that for investors coming into Saudi, apart from
Yeah.
the transition game that you've been talking about?
Correct. Yeah, I think if you look at the great kind of innovation economies around the world, whether that's the US or Singapore or other parts of the Middle East, but and particularly when you look at a per capita basis, I think this is what policymakers or other people sometimes think forget is the US is remarkable because of scale. If you're the biggest
Yeah,
economy in the world, you're 380 million people, and your 0.5% of that does well, then it looks big by its very
yeah,
nature. But if you do it on a per capita basis, I think there are key ingredients to developing the innovation economy. So I think you're right on capital. I think it's access to capital, but I also think it's the skill set to deploy that capital the right way. That's actually kind of the hard part you often find. So, what we've seen is this huge relocation from across the globe of sort of the best funds, but forget the capital for a second. It's the people who know how to deploy capital. They know how to pick the winners or pick the companies that are going to change the world. And so that talent has really moved into the region, and it's also developing locally, which is really kind of powerful. And then obviously with that, you have to have an advantageous tax environment. That's some of the big reform. I think that's frankly probably the biggest reform that we did in the Australian context is we said, look, if you invest into this area, it is more risky, right? By its very nature, tech and innovation is a more risky kind of investment. But when you do well by a very large margin. So you have to make a number of investments. Not all of them work, but when you win, you really have a big return. And we created a tax environment which is very similar to here, which says we're not going to penalize you for that. We're actually going to incentivize it. And what we saw in the Australian context, and I think what we are seeing here, is a kind of a building of critical mass. So the first thing that happened, and this is absolutely what is happening here, is the family offices. So private wealthy people, they saw a tax rate. Maybe they made money in infrastructure or real estate or mining or more conservative industries. They saw a reason to deploy a bit of their capital into this space. Maybe not all of it, but a percentage. And then as they had success and as companies started to exit, then you saw more institutional capital flow into that as well. And now in the Australian context, I mean, the super funds are backing many of the large VC funds. I think here you're seeing the same thing. So you're seeing the early investors of the family offices. Then you're seeing predominantly government funds, which are sort of fund to fund type models, which is really good because that's driving in that private capital, and then more institutional money, whether that's at the sovereign wealth level or sort of pension funds across the globe. And so that's building critical mass here, and that then gets a total life of its own. And as you have the sort of the success and the exits, then it becomes self-fulfilling because when you have the exits, either the investors are creating new funds or the founders are creating their own funds or new companies, and then the first 10 employees of a company that's had a big exit, they either create a fund or a new company. And so I think people, in the Australian context, how we went from 200 million to over 30 billion, it wasn't linear. It built up with those big whacks in those moments when you had success. And that's happening in the region. Just to give you a sense of this, I think this is like an incredible stat. So in the last 12 months, the country that has lost the highest number of millionaires is the United Kingdom in raw numbers. So the UK has lost something like 16,500 millionaires
Wow.
in the last 12 months. To put that into context, China, which is 1.4 billion, I think lost about 11 or 12,000 millionaires. And of the 16,500 millionaires from the UK, 70% of them have relocated to the Middle East. So what that means is you're actually seeing a transfer of talent, capital, employment opportunities, and locally that's developing as well. And that is just such a key ingredient in this. Now there are other ingredients, and we can unpick them. But I think that on the capital front, when it's frankly pretty hard to raise capital around the world, the VC environment in Saudi, basically in a 6-month period, basically doubled. So there is real access to capital here. Now it's smart money; they're making right investments, and people shouldn't treat the country as an ATM. But there are real investable opportunities here. Backing incredible founders and entrepreneurs and incredible commercialization of technology. And when you combine that with what we're seeing in the region, it's changing the face of not just this region but the planet.
So when you say that, and you made a really important point, money's one thing, but you got to get somebody who knows how to deploy the money into the right investments.
Correct.
Otherwise, you get a dud fund, and those people, the people who were investing in the fund, stop investing in the fund, so that stops the flow of capital. So,
Yeah.
are these individuals who are coming into Saudi to invest money into perhaps the region you're in now, and or Saudi itself in particular? Are those homegrown people? Are those homegrown investors, or or are they people who, or are they Saudi young Saudi people who've gone to America, become engineers, and got experience at one of the big funds over there, and come back to Saudi? Who are they? Where are they coming from?
Yeah. So it's both, and I think both is really, really important. So and it's kind of the Singaporean model. If you think about, if you go back with Singapore, one of the key things that they did was, look, we'll attract the best and brightest from anywhere in the world, and we'll develop our own populace over time. And so, one, yes, you're absolutely seeing this influx of entrepreneurs, of investors, of researchers and scientists into the region, but you're also seeing this homegrown ecosystem development. Just to give you a sense, one of my good mates, he has a company called Uniphonic, which is effectively a communications platform for large corporations. born in the eastern. The founder was born in the eastern province in Saudi. Never actually kind of left. This tech company has exploded. He's just raised over $100 million from SoftBank. Now,
Wow.
SoftBank are not idiots. They are backing $100 million homegrown Saudi incredible high growth company. You go to his offices here in Riyadh, and you could be walking into any office that you're walking into San Francisco. So you're seeing the mix, but I think what's also a real strength here is the kingdom had this remarkable reform where they offered extremely generous scholarships for young Saudis to study around the world. So it actually reminds me a bit of the New Colombo plan in Australia, where we did this with Asia, but they do it globally. So, very young population, and a lot of them have studied in Australia, in the US, in Europe, and as the country has changed, they're coming back in droves. So this was the Australian story that I was telling you. Like, this is the moment to kind of get this right because of the change that we're seeing. And frankly, I think young Saudis are just rightfully very patriotic. I mean, this is an amazing country, and they're proud to say that they're from Saudi. They're coming home and starting these industries, and I think that's really special when you combine it with the talent across the world. And I think it's kind of similar to what we saw in Singapore over a longer period. But for all of that to be happening in such a short period, it is transformational.
Do you think the Crown Prince has, since the Crown Prince has sort of been running the show, is that a sort of a bit of a transition it's in itself, like a change in attitude, and that is the very thing that young Saudis become very proud to call themselves a Saudi? I mean, is there
Yeah.
something going on there?
Yeah, I mean, he is one of the most remarkable leaders of our time. Look, I'm biased. I went into politics at a young age. He and I were young ministers at the same time together. But I mean, he's obviously this remarkable leader of the country. I think if you think about global leadership, what really kind of lets us down is the lack of long-term vision. Right? In the Australian context, elections every 3 years. Often it's shorter than that. You know, I think we debate very small things sometimes in the country that is frustrating. The Crown Prince is 40. So the idea of him, leading the country for decades to come is a huge asset because you are actually thinking about how do I have a long term vision? How do I make the decisions that will enable the change that needs to happen in the country? And you just get on with execution. So the whole mindset goes to how do you execute? And so I think young Saudis are rightfully very proud of the leadership that they have. They see a lot of themselves in that, and it's just not very often in history that you get that opportunity, and that is what has happened. And I think the change that we've seen in the country is completely down to him. And I think sometimes in history you get lucky. You find the right leader in the right time, and that creates these transformational moments. And that's what we have here in the kingdom. And I know for the next 20, 30, 40 years, this place will just keep delivering and keep heading towards that. Now, change is hard. Ambition and reality have to come together, and that's the exciting moment, right? When you get ambition and reality to come together. But as a result, we're building this really vibrant society here that's opening to the world. We're building this thriving economy that's creating tons of prosperity, and we're doing it on the back of being really ambitious about what this country can be and how it can contribute to the world. And that comes from the top.
It's interesting to hear someone like you talk about leadership because you've sat directly underneath, let's call it, great leaders or leaders of our nation in particular, and inspirational leaders, leaders with great vision. You're now with the Crown Prince. You just mentioned you've met Trump, etc. And I got asked this question today, and actually I got asked this question by Stuart Ayres at a New South Wales government sort of event. Stuart says to say hello, by the way, because I told him I was
Today,
interviewing you,
Stuart.
G.
Thanks, mate.
And
You can call me,
and
but let's do it through the podcast. That's good.
yeah, and yeah, correct. And but he asked me a question about courage and leadership,
Yeah.
and and to some extent, our Australian leaders today, whether it's a state or a federal, are being accused of lacking courage.
Yeah.
But leadership's a lot, or leadership's or courage within leadership sometimes is constrained because of what's going on in the place. And my response to him is, well, the Labor Party's broad church, federally I'm talking about now, broad church of people they have to satisfy sometimes means I don't make a decision because I don't want to dissatisfy everybody who's voted me in. And if you're the leader of those people who voted you in, your role is to make sure that they're not unhappy as opposed to being happy. And that becomes a constraint in terms of courage. And some people might interpret that as lacking courage, but I don't think that means that they lack courage. It's easier to be courageous when you're only 40, for example, and
Yeah.
you can sit above the decisions, so to speak, and the decisions, and you're not getting voted in every 3 years.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Because you're obviously reflecting on Australia all the time. You're still
Yeah.
very interested in what goes on in this country. What do you think about that concept of today, courage and leadership in Australia on our shores?
Yeah. Look, I am. When I think about it, I always think we should talk about how good politics can be. Like, I don't understand why would you want to be in politics if you're not there to do something big and not there to change the country? I don't understand it. I literally don't understand it. And there are a lot of really good people in politics who are very talented who want to make a big difference. But there is also a lot of people who I just sit there and I share your kind of frustration where I think, you know, we are so lucky. I mean, a former leader of my party said you sort of win the lottery of life if you're an Australian. And, we are so lucky to be in this incredible nation. But we have no sense of what our nation can be on the world stage and how we can, contribute to the world and frankly, how our country can be more prosperous. And the truth is, the world is changing at an incredibly fast rate. Like, I mean, the thing that defines our time is change, right? Whether that's
Yeah,
globalization or technology or whatever it might be, we're seeing this huge disruption in the world. And courageous leadership says there is opportunity and change. There is real opportunity if we seize that and we try and make that change our friend and drive that transition. I think weak leadership is when you try and hide under the dunas and inoculate yourself from that. And you also, I think, sell a fantasy to people. And I think it doesn't respect the intelligence of the Australian people to say, actually it's all okay, we're just going to sort of hide from this and we're going to do we're going to be boring managers is the best way of kind of putting it, do little menial changes. I mean, you and I both know, I mean, Australia is an incredible nation, but it needs big reform. I mean, we have a huge productivity problem. We do need to diversify our economy more. There is a lot that we can do to create greater prosperity, to seize those exciting opportunities and frankly just set us up to succeed in a changing world. And I don't see, as you would say, the courage anywhere in the political spectrum at the moment of people saying these are the big changes that we want to do. And now the reason is, I think, because the nature of politics has changed. So, it's very easy for people to complain and have very loud voices. And I think weak politicians weaponize that, right? So, they're very instinctively running to how do we attack an idea and tear it down. And if you make change, there's always going to be winners and losers, right? That's just the nature of change. And you could have the smallest percentage of people who lose, a small amount from a really important reform. But in the modern political environment, you can give them a huge microphone to attack that. And so politicians very naturally get afraid. The easiest thing to do in the Australian context to be popular is do nothing. Like
yeah,
all the incentives are actually to do nothing. That's the sort of leadership that we think that we want. Now, I would argue, and maybe it's naive optimism, and maybe I'm wrong, but I passionately believe that if we had courageous leadership that was honest with the Australian people and said, look, these are the challenges we face as a nation. Here's all the different options of what we can do, and let's debate them. Let's have a contest of ideas. Let's see where we can find as much consensus as possible and just do that. And where there's, a real point of contest, well, this is the vision for the country and we're going to put it to the Australian people. I think, and then you actually change the country for the better. I think if you did that in an election, you'd probably still win 51% of the vote. Now, you would see all these big scare campaigns, you would see people attacking it. Um, but you would change the country for the better, and you can set up the country for the next generation, for the next 30, 40, 50 years. But for whatever reason I don't see that, and I think it's just because the incentives in the system are always about much easier to do nothing and play at the margins. And sometimes it's worse, it's not even to do nothing, it's to tell people a lie, which is to say actually it's all fine and we've got there's nothing to do. I mean, that's just look at productivity, look at living standards, look at a number of these factors across the economy. Australia's a great country, but we can always be better, and you do need that courageous leadership, I think, to set the country up for long term success. And um, our current crop of leaders, I don't see anyone really engaging in that debate. And it saddens me, because I think if you and I went out and spoke to the business community, you and I both know what the 10 things are that the country needs to do, and we could debate it, plus or minus a little bit. But um, who's talking about tax reform in Australia? Who's talking about federation reform? Who's talking about industrial relations reform? These are all the things that we need to do to set up the country. And if we don't, we're just going to have lower living standards. We're going to have less prosperity. We've got an aging of the population in the country. So, in Saudi Arabia, there's this huge benefit of having a young population. In one intergenerational report, in the Australian context, we're going from a place of about 5 Australians working for every person who wasn't. By 2050, that's going to be about 2.5. So in
Wow.
2050, how do we pay for our social services system? How do we? You have to grow the economy. You have to have a more productive economy. Um, and I think the lack of courage that you spoke about, all that results in is, sure, some governments might get re-elected by not doing very much, but I tell you what, our kids are going to grow up in a country with less prosperity. And I think ultimately someone has to say this is what we need to do as a country.
But I think it goes back to that point you were making earlier on, where the advantages someone like Saudi has, and by the way, places like Singapore have too. They don't think in short termism.
Correct.
We think in short termism, and at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, the politicians make the decisions as to how we approach our economy, how we approach our life, how we approach by the way, our standard of living or improving our standard of living.
Yeah.
Australia, when it comes to resources, like Saudi, but Australia,
Yep.
when it comes to resources, we got every resource you want to know about. There's everything.
Exactly.
There's the whole our standard of living, in other words, wealth per capita, should be one of the best in the world. When I look at Qatar,
Yeah.
I don't understand why. I mean, it's a much smaller country, but when I look at Qatar relative to the gas that they produce, and
Yep.
Australia is like number 2 in the world when it comes to gas resources, why are we in that same sort of category? I just don't
Yeah.
get it. And
Yeah.
you're in the region. So what do you think it is that your region does that Australians, is it us? Is it the voting? Are we too apathetic? Is that us?
I think there is a bit of apathy, of course. I mean, we have huge strengths. I mean, compulsory voting, for example, is I think one of the best systems in the world, and I completely have changed my mind to that. So there are institutional strengths in the country, and I don't want to talk the country down too much, but I think we are missing our moment. I think this part of the world has a really clear sense of history. They're very naturally proud of who they are, but what they can be. They know that change has to happen. They embrace change, right? This is what I was talking about. And I think maybe it is also because of just young populations. I think, younger people are inherently more, realistic and aware of the need for change and reform. And it's because the world we grew up in has been defined by change, right? So there's a different generational element to that. And I think they are seizing their moment. And they're also just not afraid to try big things and fail along the way. The Australian appetite for failure is so low. We'd much
Totally.
rather do nothing and not do something than try and do something and fail along the way. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're in business or in government. The truth is, not everything's going to work. And it's a pretty hard thing for a politician in the Australian context to say, look, we're going to try and do these 10 big things. If they don't work, we'll stop doing it. If there's a better idea somewhere in the world, we'll steal it. If we can improve something, we'll improve it. Now, you get kind of crucified in Australia if you say that, but that's actually the kind of leadership that you need. And I think that's the leadership that we have here, where they're not afraid of, understanding the moment, making the big bet, trying to make a change. And then if something needs to be moved around, then they absolutely do that. And I think that, overwhelmingly, there's huge support for that kind of leadership, because it is changing the face of this region. In the Australian context, we're just much more comfortable to sort of not have a go. I mean, we love to say Australians love to have a go. Well, our political leaders do not like to have a go, and I think that that it wasn't always the case. If you think about, in Australia in itself was a massive project, right? It's sort of how do we
Yeah.
how do we create a nation out of sending convicts to the other side of the world, and that's a remarkable moment. Think about the Sydney Harbour Bridge, designed in the earliest part, by Bradfield in the earliest part of the 20th century. It's 8 lanes back then. It had the train on it. I mean, cars weren't really a thing. There was nothing kind of on the north side of Sydney. People said that's what we have to do. The Snowy Hydro scheme. I mean, when the Australians said we're going to do the Snowy Hydro scheme, people said it was impossible. Imagine if you tried to announce doing a new version of the Snowy Hydro like today. You'd get people would say, no, it's all too hard, it's impossible. What did that project do? Well, it completely transformed our nation. It brought people from all over the world to be part of it, which changed our society for the better. And we have had that visionary leadership. That's the sort of visionary leadership I think we see here. There's no reason why we can't go back to that. There's no reason why a leader couldn't go out there and say that today. Now, weaker politicians would attack that kind of leadership and create fear campaigns. But I do think if you had that, there's a really good chance that you'd still win. You might not win 80% of the vote, but you only need 51% to win, and then you can change the country. And I think, yeah, it just saddens me that that's not what we see today. But I'm optimistic that that might change one day.
So when you say that these decisions, policies, and visions are well supported, obviously you're talking about the people within the country, and I agree with you. Younger people tend to support change much more than older people because older people become comfortable. They don't want change. They just get used to doing stuff, and they trust and they become familiar with what they've always done. Younger people are sort of up for whatever's going to happen. But what about the media? Do they have a media in Saudi Arabia, and how does that work? What is it like to have a media in a place like Saudi
Yeah, I mean,
Arabia?
there's actually quite a vibrant media across the country. Now, across the world, we're seeing huge disruption to the media industry, and you're in it, you understand it better than most. But I think, if you roll back 20 years ago, the way that people would consume information is, effectively a media outlet that is owned by a very small number of people, whether that's a newspaper, a radio, or TV station. What we've seen is this now, Saudi has a vibrant kind of media environment. There's national newspapers led by really impressive editors. NBC is the biggest sort of media conglomerate, to put it the best way, in the region, which is headed by Mike Sneesby, who used to be the CEO of Nine, another great Australian in the region. But I think the really interesting thing about media here is, with such a young population, it is just huge consumption of media through different formats in social media. And as a fellow podcaster, I think there are a lot of really great young Saudis who are having these great podcasts, which are really vibrant. There's a real kind of debate and contest of ideas and sort of really honest conversations about what's happening in the region and in the country. And so it's actually a really interesting media environment. I particularly, I'd give a shout out to the young Saudi podcasters, people like the Mo Show. I'd encourage people to go and have a look at this. They are the voice of the country. It's these young Saudis who are the voice of the country and seeing that change, and they're really having their voices heard in a pretty vibrant way, which I don't think is what people would necessarily expect.
100%.
From this part of the world, but I'm so proud of the young Saudis who are having those conversations, and the consumption of that is rapid here. So I very quickly find out what's happening in the world because my young Saudi mates will say to me, "Did you see this on Twitter or Snapchat or Instagram?" And it's lightning. But if 70% of the population is under 35, I think almost about 65, 68% of the population are in their 20s. So,
Wow.
like, it gives you a real sense of that. And the truth is, the difference between a 20-year-old Saudi and a 30-year-old Saudi is really profound because one has sort of basically grown up after the reforms and one before. And so there's this huge influx of, a very kind of vibrant society of young Saudis who are super connected to the world, proud of their country, and being part of the change. And so I think that's yeah, I'd encourage people to come and experience it for themselves.
Well, I will be, as you know. I'm going to come over there, but can I just on that, the vibrant young people and the media, being social media especially, because the perception back here in Australia and perhaps other places of the world is that, oh, you can't say anything against the Crown Prince. You might get in terms of publications, you might get there might be some suppression. Obviously, that's not the case from what you're saying. It's actually
Yeah.
like everybody gets up there, and, as you said, contest of ideas.
Yeah.
I actually feel in Australia,
Yeah.
from what you're saying, we have more suppression on in terms of contest of ideas
Yeah.
than you do currently where you're living in Saudi Arabia.
Correct. Yeah, and I think, like, what you see. I think you see two things in the West. Look, in Australia is better than a lot of the West, but I think you see this kind of like sanctimonious lecturing of people when you have this contest of
Yep.
ideas. Like, we love other people to who supposedly are saying they're righteous. They're in the right kind of way, to tell other people how they need to live their own lives, and to tell other people how what we shouldn't do. Like, to tell people what they shouldn't do seems to be like an Australian disease sometimes, I think. We're here. As I said, it's like, how do we change the country and the region for the better? what's your idea? What's my idea? Let's debate it. Let's look at the pros and cons, and then lay it on top of that is just a natural sense of patriotism, which I think is a really good, strong thing about this region. It's they should be rightfully proud that these are great countries with amazing people, and so that dynamic's kind of very different. And on some of the nuances around the media thing, again, from that kind of sanctimonious thing, I think people who just don't understand the country often, say frankly, pretty cruel and uninformed things. Now, over time, as people understand more of the transformation that's happening and the story of the country and their incredible history and culture, the beautiful thing about Saudis, particularly, but the region, is they are the most welcoming people on the planet. I mean, it is. I cannot tell you how warm and friendly and helpful my Saudi friends are. But as that story gets out, I think that narrative will kind of change. But anybody who does that, I think they just have to come here and see it. I'll give you one example, Mark, because it was one that really, I think, highlighted this the other day. So, maybe a month or so ago, we had the Riyadh Comedy Festival. So, I'm a huge fan of stand up comedy. I went and saw Jimmy Carr and Louis C.K. and some great young Saudi comedians.
So
There's a really
Jimmy
good.
Carr was allowed to do it. Jimmy Carr's good there.
He was great. I mean, he was. I was blushing with what he was saying. So
Wow,
I think So, but in the comedy festival, we had Jimmy Carr and Louis C.K. and Dave Chappelle, and
wow.
all the great kind of stand ups.
But can I just stop you there for Wyatt for a sec? But these are guys, by the way, who don't mind sort of they will get a little
Yeah,
bit
it's not.
edgy.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and there's no constraints of what they were saying.
Wow.
They were they're all great comedians. They were really great. There's a great comedy club in Riyadh, and it really upset me because there was these I hate using the word, but there was sort of these woke lefty journalists in the US and other places who were criticizing these comedians for coming. Now, what are they criticizing? Well, if you think about it, as I said, the average age of a Saudi is 26. The really average Saudi is like a 26-year-old female who's probably in renewable energy or technology, right? Um, what do they win by denying that person going and listening to a stand-up comedian? Like,
And
I have
making
no.
their own decision.
Yeah, exactly. Like how are they benefiting the world by saying that people in this region shouldn't be allowed to go to stand-up comedy, but other people but they're okay to go down the street and listen. I just totally don't get that, and I think the strength of this country is this incredible bulk of this young population who changing the world for the better. They want to be part of a important global community. And so I think that these people who sort of criticize some of this stuff, that will naturally kind of die over time as they realize the reality on the ground. But I just would sort of encourage people before they bring misconceived ideas and different perceptions to then sort of lecture this part of the world. Like, go and experience it, go and live in it, go and see these great Saudis, and I can't wait to go to next year's comedy festival because it's really good. It's a great thing.
I think part of the problem is in Australia at least and I love my country as you do too, but there's too many people around like me, so there's too many older people who've made some money or are comfortable, and where it's my generation who tend to be the ones who want to lecture the younger generation, or particularly people from your age and down, as to what they shouldn't do and what they should do. When in fact, what we should be doing, what I like to do, but and I'm not giving myself a rap here, but some people I know like to be this, like blokes like James Packer like to do it, like etc. We like to embrace what your generation is doing. In fact, we like to invest in what your generation is doing because we know that you've got more energy than us, and you're smarter than us, and you have access to more smarter people like yourselves, and that's what Australia, I don't think, is what we're not doing enough of.
Yeah,
It's my generation.
yeah. Well, Mark, I think there is huge benefit from the wisdom of age. Like older Australians, older people across the world. You know, they have incredible lived experiences. They've worked hard. We are at our best when we stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yep.
And what I kind of see is, young people are desperate for those kind of opportunities. They want to run at it, and the best leaders in life, it doesn't matter whether it's in business or politics or whatever, are people like yourself who say, how do we give them a go? How do I help them? How do I impart the knowledge and wisdom that I've built up over a lifetime of hard work, and then let them have a crack and support them? And I've been really lucky. I've had a lot of people like that in my life that, I've learned so much from and done it. But, You're right. I don't like the mentality sometimes of this sort of whingy, like, having a go at young people who are just, out there trying to make a difference in the world and build a life for themselves. So, yeah, it does sadden me when we don't see that enough. But I also see the best of it where, in my life, I've been really lucky. I've got these incredible friends and mentors who, have done remarkable things over a long time, and they've been great. Not just great mates, but great mentors in life. And we need more people like you who do that for the next generation, because that's ultimately better for everybody.
Very nicely said. Thank you. But mate, but can I just ask you this question? And I think this is an important question, but certainly one that's racing around my brain. It's good to be for these people to be idealistic, young people. It's good to have that
Yes.
population demographic. It's good to have a leader of the country, who's young and a visionary and has the ability to make things happen. But where, in terms of execution, um, what is the level of intelligence and intellect that sits within the cohort of people you're talking about? Like, where are they getting their skills from? Are they great universities or great education
Yeah.
institutions right now in Saudi?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's an incredible, I think, institutional strength in the country, from a number of different things. So one, I would say, there's a corporate institutional strength in things like Aramco. Aramco is the
Yep.
most profitable company on the planet. So you've had this great story for the country that has obviously done a lot around resource extraction, but what it's also done is train a generation or many generations of great corporate leaders with really big, significant global corporate experience. So you see a bit of that. On science and technology and research, the kingdom has amazing universities. So, for example, KAUST, KAUST, which is on the Red Sea in Jeddah. It's a higher education institution. It on citations per capita ranks around one of the best in the world. It has a endowment that is bigger than Harvard. And its current president is a mate called Ed Byrne, who was the vice chancellor of Monash and the president of King's College in London. So,
You might
uh,
just let's just unpick a few of those things though, because like not a lot of people would really know what you're talking about. When you say citations, you mean
yes,
off the back of publications that have come out
correct.
of this university where
Yep,
somebody has done some research on a topic, tech, engineering,
yep, yep,
health, science, whatever, medicine, and that gets published, peer reviewed,
yep,
then published. What
yep,
you're saying is those publications coming out of the research in those institutions in Saudi Arabia are being cited across the world, perhaps by
yep,
others
yes.
using that publication as authority for a really important proposition. Is that what you mean by citations?
Exactly. I mean, a more simple way of saying this is the research that's happening in these institutions in the kingdom, and particularly in CAUS, which is on a per capita basis, is developing technology of some sort that has the ability to change the world and solve the big challenges facing our time. So whether that's in energy or in healthcare or in, wherever it might be, mobility, that's coming from a homegrown institution that is incredible. Another, just to give you another sense of this. KACST, KACST, is effectively the kingdom's version of CSIRO, but much larger in many ways, and thousands of research scientists working on super interesting challenges, everything from disease control through to satellite technology. They've just done an amazing partnership with Lucid, the electric vehicle car company, which, I mean, anybody who's driven a Lucid, I mean, it's a really amazing car. They're developing here at Caxt the battery technology for it, the resilience to harsh environments, solving logistical challenges, and so that's with thousands of homegrown research scientists coming out of these great institutions. I mentioned Aramco. There was a whole generation of scientists and engineers that were also trained at the universities around Aramco that helped create that change. So you've got this institutional strength in the country. Now, there's always change that needs to happen, and things are moving, but it is a strong foundation. The other layer is what we spoke about before, which was a recognition early on. Let's send our people across the globe, make that as easy as possible, let them get the skill sets, and then when they come home, the country benefits. And Saudi has done more on that front than any country I can think of. So you've got those two things playing out, and I think when you combine that with the young population, the young leader, that's a institutional strength in the country that's pretty special.
You in your Australian roles were very well, involved in when I talked about Innovation Nation or Malcolm Turnbull's Innovation Nation, very involved in a lot of people. My criticism of that phrase was most people couldn't even spell innovation. They didn't really know what you mean by Innovation Nation. And like it's just Malcolm being a high intellect,
Yeah,
extremely bright guy. Always, in my view, always made the assumption that everybody knew what he was talking about when probably 1% of the population had his capacity, therefore did not know what he was talking about. And I thought that Innovation Nation was probably a little bit
yeah,
too hoi polloi. Um, but if I could reduce it back down to science, technology, engineering, and maths, those four
yeah,
topics, those which are four
yeah,
things we've sort of ignored a little bit here in Australia, not necessarily during your period, but traditionally, because we have relied on mining and have relied on construction to a large extent. But science, technology, energy, and engineering, I should say, and maths, particularly with women, getting women, a greater percentage of women involved in that. In Australia, we're starting to do much better in that regard. How is STEM being
mm,
addressed as a resource for Saudi Arabia and as a sort of maybe as part of the vision, STEM
yeah.
itself?
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with your assessment of the failure of our ability to tell the story. I think with hindsight, I think there's a real opportunity to tell the story, because I mean ultimately what it's about, right, is what sort of country do you want your kids to grow up in? I
Yeah.
think I'll come back to your question. I'll give you a great story on this. I always said to people, the moment that we would succeed on that storytelling is when the guy that drives the truck from Bundaberg to Sydney realizes that if we get this right, his kids grow up with more kind of opportunity in the country. And we set up the Tech Council of Australia after I was in politics, which is it's a great kind of industry body to help support the industry. It was chaired by Robin Denholm, who's the global chair of Tesla, who's a great friend and the founders of the biggest tech companies. And when we did it, I don't think I've ever told this story publicly, but we did some polling and some research to sort of say, well, what were the sentiments towards the tech industry in the country? And we did this focus group. It was sort of coming out of COVID, so a lot of it was online. And there was literally this truck driver who was driving from Bundaberg to Sydney. This is the sort of thing I would use in my stump speech. And he's he's in the hotel room, I think in Coonabarabran or something. And it was fantastic. He's got the cigarette. He's sitting there. He's smoking, and he says, "Look, I know that this new industry might be a challenge, right? Like I might not drive the truck one day. I understood the threat, and that was the heart of the politics. Was like, is this a threat or an opportunity? But he said, and he had this great line. He's like, my son spends too much time on video games, and I want him to get off. But if he can be involved in creating the thing that means the truck doesn't need me to drive it anymore, then I'm proud of him and I'm proud of the country." And
Wow.
like we never really got that narrative right, but I think that that is actually the truth of what all of this means. To your point, uh, I would add one more. Yes, STEM is super important, but I also think entrepreneur skill sets. So I think without the entrepreneurs and the STEM coming together, this doesn't quite play out, because when I became the minister in Australia, we ranked the top three in the OECD for research and the bottom three for commercialization. So if you're not, you have to do the great research, but if you're not commercializing it into business products, services that change the world and create economic activity, you kind of fail. So I would add that to it. Um, I think in Saudi, this is just a natural strength. So um, you've seen historically a lot of focus on STEM, partly because of the Aramco story. So the greatest institutions initially started in engineering and those kind of skill sets around Aramco. Then you saw the influx out into the world, and so that was just a very natural thing that a lot of Saudis would study. And then now it's just taken on a life of its own. At NEOM, I was very lucky. I had a number of female Saudi PhD in renewable energy, in different types of technology, trained at KAUST or other institutions, working for me. Um, that is really, really, really powerful, and that's kind of picking up. One of the great things we did at NEOM was we also had our own scholarship program to help Saudis from the region, which is a pretty regional area, right? It's in the northwest, but there's not much there yet. So we're talking really small kind of communities, and we would say to the high school students or the university students, look, if you want to work in this kind of field, we'll give you a scholarship to go to the US or the UK to study in that field. And one of the best things I did, we went to the US and we met with all of these students that we'd given this scholarship to, a few hundred students. And I met five or six local girls from Tabuk, which is a regional kind of province in Saudi Arabia, who were all studying computer science.
Wow.
Now, in Australia, if I could find seven girls, 18, 19, 20, studying computer science, I would be, amazed. It's like a great thing. It wasn't even something that they contemplated that was unusual or that was a new kind of thing. It just was assumed that that's what they would be doing. And I think this is one of these kind of moments where the kingdom is, in some cases, I find more progressive on this stuff because, again, I think, I don't want to labor the age point too much, but if you've got a young population, you're just naturally more tech savvy and, more inclined to have tech adoption. So you're more likely then to have a bigger group of people or, around you, friends, mentors, supporters, who would just naturally say, okay, well, I will study, renewable energy or computer science or engineering or mathematics in any of these kind of fields. AI, huge thing in the region. And so yeah, you just see a lot more of that here than I think people realize, and frankly, probably more than you see in Australia.
So the burning question for me, mate, is I've known you for a while now, and especially when you're a much younger guy, and are you still single?
I but it really hurts. I am going through a relationship that is sadly ending, I would say,
Oh, sorry to hear that.
but that's
Or
okay, Mark. I'm glad we're talking about it on the podcast, and
yeah,
I
there's no worries,
I,
mate, because everybody
I
be wondering.
well, one of the sad things that I think is, it's a very sad thing to go through, and it's not something you want to, no one wants to experience. But I mean, the divorce rate is extremely high in Australia and everywhere, and that's a sad thing in life. And I wish them well, but I'll come get some fatherly advice from you on the dating front once I'm ready to do it
Mate, I'm
again.
the
So.
worst person to ask. Are you serious? 3 times. So, like,
Um,
but the reason why I asked that is because um, for people who might be listening to this, for those people thinking, so I'm a entrepreneur. I've got a new technology idea, or I've got something up and running. Maybe I could go to a Saudi and experience, maybe working over there, trying to raise some money, or etc. Building a lab, whatever the deal is. Because a lot of people go to San Francisco, but no one really. I don't think many consider going to Saudi.
yeah,
Um, but they'd also like to know what it's like to live there, like
yeah,
as
yeah,
a single person, perhaps because like I know they get a sense of San Francisco very similar to Australia, very similar to
yeah,
Sydney, but what is it like to be single and or just socialization within a
yeah.
place like that?
It's fun is the best way of putting it. I mean, I think Saudis, as I said, are incredibly warm, incredibly welcoming. It's one of these countries where you can meet someone on the streets or the shops, and then come back to our place, come back, like they're just very, very, very welcoming people who really enjoy life. And I think you know what it is. There's an appreciation for life here that is totally intoxicating. Like they just love life, love people. They appreciate what they've got, and I think that that's a really great kind of place to be. So I think if you're a young single person, like you're going to meet so many interesting people here and be exposed to so many different people from different walks of life, which is a great thing to do at that stage. I think if you have a young family as well, it's just a very family friendly environment as well. So if you get married and have kids, this is a great place to do that. As an Australian, you want to go see the world. It's 48 hours on a plane somewhere usually, by the time you get there. Here, you're just so connected to everywhere in the globe as well. So the opportunity to kind of explore and get out and see different countries is really profound, and also across the region. I mean, I had one of my best mates from uni here a few weeks ago, and we drove, Saudi, Oman, the UAE, and crossing borders in a car and driving. I mean, as an Australian, it's just something you don't kind of think about. So that's really great. And then obviously, your ability to set yourself up in a way here that's just harder to do in other parts of the world is really significant. So I think it's a great place. There's huge diversity in the region. There's super welcoming people. It's a lot of fun. It's really,
Is it safe? Safe?
oh, it's incomprehensible how safe this place is. So, I reckon I could walk out with my wallet full of cash and leave it, on the main street, and within an hour, someone would bring it back and
No.
return to me. I think there's a real culture around that,
Wow.
which is really kind of special. And I mean, not to talk down the UK again, but the UK has a real kind of crime crisis. I mean, I was in London a little while ago, and I had my phone on the table at sitting outside a Chinese restaurant in the city, and my mate was like, "What are you doing? That's going to get stolen." Uh, and like you basically, I mean, every person I talk to in London at the moment has had several phones stolen. The thought that that would happen in this country is ridiculous. I mean, I like it is so safe, so welcoming. Culturally, people look out for each other here, which I think is really, really kind of special. And this is a great strength that Australia has as well. It's incredibly safe. I mean, I don't, I probably shouldn't say this too loud, but I don't remember in Australia ever having keys to my house. Like it's just not, I would never, anybody who's listening, please don't go rob my house in Australia. But I've never, I've never locked my doors. I mean, maybe that's growing up on the farm or whatever, but like, it's a very safe environment, and that's what it's like here. It's just people look out for each other. People are it's an extremely safe and welcoming environment, and so and people are extremely honest as well. Like there's a real sense of they want to be good partners and work with you and look after you, and they're very happy that you're part of the country. And I'm really proud to call Saudi Arabia home, and it's partly because of just the warmth of their people, and their pride in their country. I think is super special.
Do you ever sit back and sort of scratch your head and say, how did the kid, son of a strawberry farmer from Queensland, end up being up until today, the in charge of innovation at NEOM, which is probably one of the biggest, most ambitious projects on the planet today,
Yeah,
and
I
at ripe old age
it's
of 35 or whatever you are?
Yeah, I think there are moments when you like, of course, you sort of reflect and you say, "How did that happen?" or whatever. The truth, you're running on adrenaline, like whether it was in politics or in business or here, which is kind of a blend of both, to be honest. You know this better than most people, right? You're running on adrenaline. You're trying to make sure you're doing the right thing. You're involved in big decisions, so you're just very focused on doing a good job. So you don't have that many quiet moments where you reflect and you realize that, but they do happen. And I mean, I've been incredibly fortunate and lucky to have these different experiences across my life. But I think if I think about how that happened, I mean, it's I've never been afraid of trying to do something different, and accepting you might fail. Like it's really important. This is my thing. Like all of my friends who have done great things in life, in politics or in business or whatever it might be, people talk about their successes, but they've all had different failures at different times, right? And they've all learned from. I mean, I've had failures in politics and whatever, um, but you learn from them, and you're not afraid of that. And I think if you think about what is it that stops people from doing things, it's essentially fear, right? And it's fear of what do other people think, and am I going to fail? And I think the thing that I've been lucky is I've had people in my life that have sort of helped instill in me that if you fail, start again, learn from the lessons, do something, do the next thing. That's really important. And look, of course, you as a human being, you care about what other people think, but it can't stop you from trying to do something. And I come back to this theme of like a contest of ideas. I mean, some of my best mates, the reason we're mates is because we disagree on things. We enjoy the kind of banter and the back and forward that comes with it. And so I just think like the reason I've been lucky to have kind of the experiences that I have is I've not been afraid to fail, and I've not necessarily been too afraid of what other people think. Now, of course, I listen and I want to learn from it, but I don't, if they disagree with me, that's not a bad thing. And then not afraid to kind of have a go. And I think that that's probably just why I've been lucky in that sense to have the experiences that I've had.
Well, I often say fear is the greatest thief of imagination that exists.
Yeah,
It definitely is. And but one of the things that you've sort of opened up in this conversation is the contest of ideas. And I think that in places like the UK, perhaps to a lesser extent here in Australia, places like the US, good examples, Charlie Kirk,
yeah,
the lack or the disbelief in the contest of ideas, it's nearly like you're calling for tyranny.
yeah,
If particularly in a philosophical sense, like a political sense, if you're coming up with an idea that you want to put out there and open to the contest, or alternatively, if you're contesting someone else's idea, it's nearly like you're heretical.
yeah,
Like in other words,
yeah,
you're committing heresy.
yeah.
How dare you say that?
Yes,
It's
yeah,
great to hear because I'll be honest with you, I am so refreshingly surprised to hear the contest of ideas is something that's embraced in the Middle East.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
the last place
absolutely.
I thought I'd ever hear it.
But the Middle East is vibrant, and that vibrant culture says let's have a contest of ideas, and I think, as I said before, I mean, Trump, I think, you can like or dislike Trump, but I think he got this line right where he said, used to be defined by chaos, now it's defined by commerce. And if you bring a contest of ideas to commerce and changing a society, that is what is a huge strength here. And I think it's a huge weakness in the West when this doesn't happen. So as I said before, your point about the heresy is what I would call this sanctimonious lecturing. So, I think we are at our best when we have that contest of ideas and we say, if I disagree with you, my best response is a better idea, a better argument, a better position, and debate that idea. I think at our worst, what we lose is actually, no, I'm not interested in the contest of ideas. I just want to tell you can't do that, and I want to tell you can't say that. Um, and you're a bad person if you have a different idea to me. And I think we let ourselves down when we question the motivations of other people, and that's that kind of sanctimonious kind of lecturing, is we're questioning the motivations, not what they want to do. And my best mates, I mean, politics taught me this. I mean, literally my best mates are people who I would struggle to name a thing that we agree on. But I certainly have never questioned their motivations. We all love our country, we all love, we all want to make a difference in the world. um, I don't know why that conversation's so hard to have, but for whatever reason, it seems to be harder to have every day. And um, the beauty of this region is that disease hasn't kind of infected this region. I mean, the great strength is there. How do we get new people here to do new things to create a better world? And how do we ensure that our people are changing this country and this region for the better? And uh, that's just something pretty special to be part of.
Who would you encourage to like? We still got a lot of young people who are here in Australia who are entrepreneurs, who have side hustles, who are ambitious to
Yeah.
do something new. Um, People who are studying, trying to discover things at Australian universities are great institutions, great places to discover things and to be encouraged to do these sorts of things. And very intelligent people, knowledgeable. Of those different cohorts, who would be best suited to maybe suit up and say, "I'm on my way to Riyadh"?
Yeah. I mean, Saudi is incredibly welcoming, and we'll take talent from anywhere in any kind of field. In the Australian context, there's a ton of Australians already here. I mean, people don't necessarily realize this. There's over 10,000 Australians in the kingdom,
Wow.
and in really senior positions. So, I talked about Ed, who's the president of Cows, Mike, who's the CEO of NBC, Sarah Hill, who is running a really large project as part of the PIF here, used to develop Western Sydney, the area around Western Sydney's Bradfield development. You just keep going through. There are a lot of really senior Australians here, and there are a lot of just large numbers, over 10,000 Australians here contributing to the country. And so there's a great kind of culture. We have a really similar sense of humor. So it's actually a really interesting kind of strength. The Saudis are, I was talking about the comedy festival. I mean, they have just such a great sense of humor. It's funny and it's dark. And, we sort of have a go at each other,
You take the
which
mickey out of each other?
exactly. I was trying to find the politically correct word. Yes, you take the
Mickey.
mickey out of each other. Yeah, that's the one I was looking for. Thank you. Yeah, we take the mickey out of each other, which, Americans and Europeans don't quite get. And so this is sort of like really, it's a real kind of strength here that we have. And so, look, I mean, I would encourage people in any kind of field. I do think, particularly entrepreneurs, investors, people in technology, science, research. Obviously, it's one of the most interesting parts of the world. But across the board, this is a great place to be. I'll tell you a little story because it's on my mind. So tomorrow I have a friend coming to visit in Riyadh who he he created a company in Australia, a technology company. It at its peak had about a $500 million valuation. So built an amazing kind of company. He went to San Francisco when the company got going, and this is before I was the minister. And I said to him, if we're successful in the Australian context, you're going to come home. And he said, no, 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 no. The US market's too big and capital, and we love what you're doing. Anyway, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 years after we did our reforms, he listed the company on the ASX. He ultimately came home and made that prosperity. He's then moved back to sort of splits his time between Europe and the US. And he's coming here tomorrow because this is where he wants the future, his future to be. This is where he wants to create his next thing. This is where he wants to
Wow.
create the new thing. And so I feel like he's kind of the example of the full circle that we've gone on, where you have these great kind of innovators, entrepreneurs, people in science, technology, engineering, who recognize just how important this part of the world is now, and making it home. The other thing that's special about this, I think, is the connections across the globe, because of where we sit. So it's just very natural here for people to come from Asia, Europe, or the US, where, I always find if I'm in Europe, you don't quite get that blending, or in the US, obviously at its best, you get that blending, but not always. We're here, it's very natural to be in a in a company, and you're working with great Saudis, great people from somewhere in Asia, somewhere in Europe, somewhere in the US, all in the same team. In the NEOM context, we had people from over 100 countries
Wow.
working on the project. So there is that real blending of talent from across the globe here, and that just creates something pretty unique. And it also, frankly, gives you access just to a bigger market as well. So yeah, I think people should come and experience it for themselves, and then you won't find a more welcoming place than here to do big things.
And when does your actual term at NEOM complete?
Yesterday,
Yesterday. So
there you
okay, let's just tease this out a little bit. Have you got anything for us as to what is
go.
the next stage of Wyatt Roy's life?
Well, I won't, give it all away today. But what I would say is, I am really in love with this country, with the region. I'm really proud to call this remarkable place home. I will contribute and continue to do stuff here, working, with some very interesting people across the country and across the world. And I won't give you more than that today, but that's a little teaser.
Well, knowing, having watched you over many, many years, it will be, I'd say, something uh, uh, large, something that other people would be going, "Oh my God, has he done that?" And it won't be with small partners; it'll be with larger partners. And what I'm hoping to do is, once again, is to be proud of what Wyatt Roy has achieved, and I'm sure that's going to be the case next round. And we can't wait. I can't wait to find out what
Well,
the hell it is, mate.
well, that's kind. Well, I tell you what, Mark. When you come here, we can talk about it, and I'd love to show you the country and the people. And I think it's been great to chat as well, because I think this story needs to be told more, and I'm glad that you're giving a voice to something pretty special. And come and see and touch it, feel it, and then maybe I'll tell you a bit more about what I'm going to do.
I'm planning. I'm definitely planning for 2026, but I'm thinking about later January, February. Is there a bad time of year to not be? Is there a time of year not to be there?
No, I mean, it depends where you go. The look, winter in this part of the world, I think, is amazing. Like, because it's perfect weather, sunny, blue skies. People don't realize this. I mean, it depends what you're doing. If coming from a business point of view or a tourism point of view, um, because of the diversity in landscapes and these incredible mountain ranges, even if you come in the middle of summer, if you go into the mountain ranges in Saudi, you can have these incredible kind of hot summer holidays. But it's temperate, it's cool, it's nice. It in parts of the country are actually really luscious. And so depending on what time of the year, you might want to pick what you're doing. But if I was to say to somebody, if you want to experience the country at its best, coming in the middle of winter is the best winter in the world here. So try and time it for that.
Mate, you're looking really chilled. You look like you're very happy and quite replete. So well done, mate. To be frank with you, I'm quite proud of an Australian doing so well overseas. I love seeing that. And thanks very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, mate. No, I've really appreciated the chat, and we'll catch up soon.
You betcha.